Welcome to our third Letting Library Lecture Series of 2023 entitled The Mayors. This year, we are celebrating City of Milwaukee's 120th anniversary of incorporation. Our town is now officially recognized as 120 years old. This does not mean that people in life did not call this home before then, but it is the date the state recognizes our existence. Tonight, we have assembled some of the most influential mayors of Milwaukee history. We will begin the lecture with Councilor Massey on the importance of the mayors to the City of Milwaukie, a special address by Dr. Steve Bennett about the Milwaukie Museum, then from Scott Stauffer, our great city recorder, on the history of the mayors, and lastly, we'll discuss with former mayors Tomei and Gamba about being a mayor, their triumphs and failures, and their influences they had on our city, not only from the time they served, but to the future of the residents. My name is Greg Heemer, the Communications Director for Milwaukie Historical Society. Councilor Massey was looking for a hometown in 2015 and chose to make it in Milwaukie. In his career as a naval officer, he moved 13 times. So after that, vagabond life, Milwaukee's strong sense of community was very appealing to him. While looking for a house for sale in Milwaukie, a resident approached Robert and said, moving here would be one of the best decisions he could make. Some of the best advice that he's ever heard, according to Robert. Robert became involved in several volunteer organizations and ultimately applied to serve on the city's planning commission. His 4 years on the commission allowed him to participate in land use decisions, which are frequently the most important a city can make. During the comprehensive plan update in 2020, he chaired the commission. The comprehensive plan benefited greatly from citizen participation, which included advisory groups, town halls, open houses, and public meetings. Robert believes city policy is always better when we have a wide variety of views. On a related note, he urges residents to volunteer for a board or commission. His public service is very rewarding and believes others' experience would be the same. While Councilor Massey sees Milwaukie as a great place to live, he knows there is always room for improvement. In making Milwaukie even better, Robert believes community engagement, infrastructure, and sustainability are enduring focus areas. Councilor Massey and I served on the Planning Commission together. Now, what his bio did not tell you is that he worked for the Navy, most of the time commanding ships. His no-nonsense but easygoing style is very hard to sum up. The best part of Councilor Massey is after a tough debate, he turns around with a smile. Councilor Massey truly loves the town that he serves, always tries to find the best solutions, and is willing to do the right thing with an enormous smile. Please let me introduce tonight Councilor Massey.
Wow, you would think that Greg is auditioning for a publicist role. Well, but thank you for that introduction. So I know as one of the warm-up acts, my job is to get on and get off, and so I'm going to do that. So I want to talk about the structure of the government in Milwaukie, and that starts with the authority of the mayor. And what I want to tell you is that authority is laid out in the city charter. Anybody read the city charter? I see one hand back there. Let me tell you, two, okay, all right. Don't be shy, don't be shy. Let me just tell you, if you want to be smart and look smart to other people, you know, you read these basic documents, it's kind of like our local constitution. And, you know, I've got relatives who want to tell me about the Constitution, but they've never read it. So, you know, you'll be smart and you'll look smart if you read those basic documents like the city charter or the federal constitution or the state constitution, okay? And it's not only the authority of the mayor, it's the authority of the council and the city manager, because that kind of, you know, slices up the pies about what people can do and what they can't do, okay? And so, you know, the political scientists, the academics in this world, they always want to categorize things, okay? And so they have categories for these things. And they have the category of the weak mayor and the strong mayor. And in Milwaukee, we have the weak mayor, okay? And I'm going to kind of explain to you about what that is. So, despite the fact that we live in a weak mayor city, you're probably more familiar with the strong mayor. Why is that? Because larger cities in our country tend to have strong mayors. You know, all these movies and TV shows we see, it's always a strong mayor in some battle with the union or the mob or whatever, you know. And so that, you know, forms much of our opinion about how cities work and that kind of thing. But the differences between the strong mayor and the weak mayors is that in these strong mayor positions, the mayor actually may exercise veto power, much like the president does, and he or she is going to develop that budget and submit it for approval. They are going to have hiring and firing authority over the major department heads, like the police commissioner or the sanitation director or whoever. And so in this model, the mayor is much like the corporate CEO, with the city council serving as the board of directors. And some would even say the board of advisors if the mayor really has a lot of power. But these tend to be, again, in large cities where the elections are partisan. They run as Democrats or Republicans or one of the other parties. Whereas in our city, they're nonpartisan elections. We don't run as Democrats or Republicans. I mean, there could conceivably be an election where there's an election for a city councilor for position 2, my position. There may be 3 people, all members of the same party, because we don't have primaries or anything like that. They don't run as members of a political party. Weak mayors, on the other hand, they only have 1 vote. So, and typically, they don't have a veto power, and so they share those votes with the councilors. I mean, the mayor in Milwaukee may really want to do something, but the other city councilors can vote Lisa Beatty down and not agree with her, okay? So the city manager is the CEO in this model, and despite the fact that we are a weak mayor form of government, if I lined up 20 residents of the city and said, give me the name of the mayor, we'd get probably a pretty good number of people who'd say, oh, it's Lisa Beatty. If I lined up that same 20 people and said, who's the city manager? They go, probably wouldn't know, okay? But the city manager has a lot of authority in that weak mayor model that I'm talking about. Our city manager develops the budget and submits it for approval, and the city manager will handle all the major hiring and firing, with a few exceptions. I mean, the city council hires the city manager, the police chief, the city attorney, and the municipal judge. But all other hiring and firing decisions are made by the city manager. And the city managers, are well-educated, have a lot of experience. It's like anything else. They work their way up. They don't graduate from college and go become a city manager. They work in mid-level positions and work their way up to get hired into those kind of positions. There is a city manager major in a lot of cities, in a lot of colleges, okay? Despite the fact that we call those mayors weak, I would contend they really have to be strong leaders. And the reasons for that is they really have to exercise a lot of soft power. They have to influence people. They have to be thought leaders so that they can build consensus and that kind of thing, because they don't have that absolute power of veto or making decisions over hiring and firing and that kind of thing. But the advantages of that is having that, that number of counselors who share that power is you get a much more diverse voice in decision making. And this lessens the ability of special interest powers to prevail, because if there's a special interest group who wants a certain policy, well, they have to convince, in our case, 5 people instead of 1 person. okay? And you have this merit-based hiring versus partisan political hiring. We've all read stories about, some city, hiring the doofus cousin who really couldn't do the job and that kind of thing. Fortunately, those are the outliers, but it happens, and so we have much more of a merit-based hiring situation. And as I said before, the professional staff really does have the education and experience that political appointees are likely not to have, okay, in the nuts and bolts of running a city. So I've seen the weak mayor form of government more often referred to as a council manager form of government because it's a little more positive, it's a more positive descriptor. And it's the form of government that's employed in the majority of small and medium-sized cities and becoming more prevalent in larger cities as well. And I will tell you that the strong mayor form of government is not all bad. And I'll give you the example of New York City at 9/11, okay? There's a strong mayor form of government, and the mayor at the time, Rudy Giuliani, he's certainly gone through some changes over the years. But I would tell you that, that form of government, that strong a personality in New York City in that time of crisis probably served New York City pretty well, okay? So the reason that we have this city manager form of government is it's been in place it started like 100 years ago, and it was a result of all of the corruption and nepotism in cities. And we probably all remember back to our civics class, our history class about Tammany Hall in New York City. Again, New York City is the one that we all know about. But there were political machines in every city there was. I grew up in the Memphis, Tennessee area, and it was the Trump, group that ran the city for decades and decades and decades. And through this adoption of this form of government, there is a significant lessening of corruption, graft, and nepotism. It's not gone completely, but it's certainly gone down quite a bit. So there endeth the sermon, and I know that once the mayors with their sparkling personalities and their anecdotes will add to that, and mine is merely the framework, so thank you for having me. Yeah.
This program is being produced by our great partner, Willamette Falls Studio. Willamette Falls Studio's mission is to inspire lifelong learning, advance knowledge, and define communications through digital media technology to educate and strengthen communities. Their professional staff work daily to create media content for local organizations, capture city projects, consult on productions, customize broadcast systems, and provide technical support. Willamette Falls Studio, where you learn, create, and belong. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Steve Bennett, Milwaukie Historical Society President. Steve Bennett devotes his time to working with individuals and organizations who share his love of history at the individual and local level. He works historical societies in Clackamas County to further their missions of collecting and preserving our collective artifacts and stories. He works with individuals to help them discover their past as a way to enlarge their future. Dr. Bennett has a wide-ranging academic background, BA in philosophy, MA and PhD in, get this, Near Eastern languages, MBA in management, and he worked as an information technology as a project manager for 30 years and is enjoying retirement right now. Over the past several years, Dr. Bennett has focused his attention on local property research, helping many individuals uncover things they didn't know about the places and people who contribute to making them who they are today. It is funny how the universe works sometimes. Steve came in wandering in the Milwaukie Museum, researching his home, looking for articles about Mr. King, the original owner. Over time, Steve developed a relationship with us, a bond, a friendship. Some of us even call it love. Today, because of a few visits, Steve brings his intellect, knowledge, and experience to our board. We are ever so thankful to have him as a volunteer. Please welcome Dr. Steve Bennett.
I never get used to that. All right, my name is Steve Bennett. I am president of the Milwaukie Historical Society, the owners and operators of the world's largest and only museum dedicated to Milwaukie, Oregon. We are located at 3737 Southeast Adams and are open on Saturdays from 11 to 4. And I let you know that that's a new time for us. We recently changed our times, giving ourselves an earlier start, and giving us more time for people to come in and make it easier for you to join us. Yes, we are a museum. It's the building you have been driving by for 15 years and never stopped in. And trust me, it's worth your while to take the time to stop. And by the way, everyone who comes in, it seems like, says that. You know, I've been driving by for years and never stopped by. It is well worth your time. Milwaukie Museum prides itself in telling the stories of our history, the Milwaukee's history. The past is the past, so those stories could be good, they could be bad, or they could be ugly. We tell them all. We work with organizations like the Oregon Black Pioneers, Clackamas County Historical Society, Clackamas County Heritage Council, the Japanese American Museum of Oregon, the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, to expand our knowledge and tell the history of all the people who lived in this area that we call Milwaukie today. Your membership dollars pay for the operations of the museum, making admissions free, so we could remove barriers of income inequality for those who want to learn about our great city of Milwaukie. 2023 started out with a bang, and it's going to explode as the year goes on. As Greg mentioned before, we have held 2 Letting Library lecture series, done countless proclamations, and have completed the 2023 project. Thanks especially to David Parker, Linda Carr, and Siri Bernard. The 2023 project interviewed over 50 new and longtime members of Milwaukie. And if you haven't seen those videos yet, I encourage you to go to the Milwaukie Heritage channel on YouTube to view them. The project created short and long versions of people saying happy birthday to our city for the 120th anniversary of our incorporation. Not only do the videos make you feel exceptional about being a Milwaukeean, but they also express our shared values and camaraderie. So, mark your calendars now. It's the time for our summer events. In mid-June, we will be opening our newest exhibit entitled Milwaukee's Historic Women Activists, Leaders, and Great Personalities. This exhibit was created by our Women's History Project and showcases the history and influence of 12 women who shaped Milwaukie as we see it today. Our newest book, entitled the same, authored by Amelia Gonzalez Clements and Stella Tompkins, allows you to bring those stories home with you. You can buy that now on sale at the Milwaukie Museum. Come on in to get a copy. Come also to enjoy our kid-friendly and young at heart performer during our performances in the museum in July, August, and September on the second Saturday of each month. Shows at 11:30 a.m. and 1:30 p.m. If you're interested in historic homes or preserving Milwaukee's historic past, Milwaukie Museum is prepared to start working on both of these. If you would like to volunteer and spend time helping the community understand the importance of preserving Milwaukee's past for future generations, then come and join us. We are currently recruiting volunteers to help us accomplish our historic homes inventory and to catalog the artifacts and valuables that we have at the museum. Just email milwaukeemuseum.com to join our team, milwaukeemuseum@gmail.com to join our team. No experience necessary. We just ask you to come with a smile and a willingness to make a difference. Milwaukie Museum is funded by memberships and donations. Consider becoming a member today. For an individual, it's only $20, and for a business, that's $100. By becoming a member, you will receive information about upcoming events, member-only gatherings, and the opportunities that the museum can provide for you. As a business, we provide advertising for your business in all of our literature, and also offer the opportunity of working together with you in business events. Either way you become a member, your dollars will help to ensure that you are preserving Milwaukee's history for future generations, and you are contributing to the wonderful programming like tonight's presentation. Check out the website at www.milwaukeemuseum.com to join, or simply stop by the museum. I'm sure you'll come. Thank you to our residents, past, present, and future, for your continued support. Thanks.
One of our partners in programming with the Letting Library Lecture Series is this beautiful building, the Letting Library. Beginning June 1st, kids, teens, and adults are invited to earn prizes for reading by joining the library's summer reading program. Find your voice. All ages are welcome to participate. Even babies and toddlers can join in the fun by tracking days they sing or listen to stories. The generous support of the Friends of the Letting Library makes the summer reading program possible. For more information, check out their online calendar or pick up one of their programming brochures on your way out the door. Scott Stauffer is truly one of the best employees City of Milwaukie has. Being a local, he graduated from Roosevelt High School and went on to obtain his master's in public policy at Oregon State University. He joined the city's recorder office in 2013 as an administrative specialist, and after the retirement of his beloved boss, Pat Duvall, he was awarded the position awarded the position of city recorder. Mr. Stauffer and his wife Sarah, along with two very active boys, live here in Milwaukie. Even though his love of baseball and bow ties are all over his social media page, his happiness and devotion to the city is second to none. Scott and I have interacted on various, sometimes feels like thousands of activities, and bonded over a love of our history. It is truly amazing when you meet a kindred soul, someone who understands a passion and is willing to discuss the passion in a reciprocal way. We could spend days locked in a room talking about Milwaukee history and probably the history of mankind, but we know that our wives would never allow us to do that. So Scott shares the passion of Milwaukee's museum mission and supports it more than we could ever appreciate. There are two things I really admire about Scott. One, his rule responding to emails in 2 hours. The other, and the most important, is the time he takes away from his busy family life to help us organize, set up, and take down the room, run the Zoom, bring in and out equipment for every Letting Library lecture series. Scott, thank you is never enough for all that you do, your support and willingness to deal with my annex, but thank you. Here to give us a history lesson on the City of Milwaukie mayors is our city recorder, Scott Stauffer.
Thank you, Greg. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. As was just said perhaps too many times, my name is Scott Stauffer, and I have the honor to serve as the city's 24th city recorder. Tonight, I'd like to thank the Historical Society for organizing these series of lectures. The city greatly appreciates the Historical Society's partnership, and we thank the many volunteers who ensure that our community stories are preserved. I'd also like to thank, on behalf of the city, our esteemed speakers, our former mayors. Thank you both for being here tonight. Councilor Massey for his remarks, Steve, and Greg, thank you for your remarks as well. Tonight, I will provide brief notes on many of our former mayors. What I relay are only some of the stories. I've been limited to 15 minutes and I have a horrible track record, I'm sorry.
You'll make a great politician.
Many details have been lost. Many of the stories from city council meetings are not interesting enough to tell you tonight. We know a lot about some mayors. We know almost nothing about others. The good news is I have pictures. From 1903 until 1991, Milwaukee's mayors served 2-year terms. It's an interesting note to keep in mind as we go through the story. That changed in 1990. A few quick facts before we launch into the characters who have led our city. As of June 2020, as of this month, 2023, 31 individuals have served as mayor. 28 were elected and 6 were appointed. 4 of the appointed were then elected. 9 mayors have resigned. 1 was recalled. 4 have been women. 24 also served as council members, and only 1 has served 2 non-consecutive terms. So let's start at the beginning. Balthazar William Schindler, more commonly known as William Schindler, was a jack of all trades. He was a carpenter, farmer, builder, grocer, developer, investor, and, of course, a politician. He owned one of the first phones, and I don't know how they figured this out, but the 7th car in Milwaukie. His farm, pictured there, the farmhouse, was located near 32nd and Harrison and would be home to the world-famous dogwood tree that gave the city its nickname of the Dogwood City of the West. He was described by his son as a, quote, strong Democrat and politically oriented. In 1903, Schindler won the first mayoral contest in Milwaukee history, and that photo in the middle are the 2 first candidates for Milwaukee mayor. Mayor Schindler defeated Isaac Mullen. During his administration, sidewalks, sewer lines, and a city hall were built. By the end of Mayor Schindler's time in office, the city was debt-free, had $400 in the bank, and was owed $500 from the telephone company. Moving into what I call the town years, we don't know a lot about these mayors. These are the guys we don't know a lot about. But this period saw Milwaukie develop into an established city with departments, committees, budgets, and plenty of politics. Our second mayor was Philip Strebe. He was a banker with the firm that is now KeyBank. This is Mayor E.T. Elmer, and that's not what he looked like when he was mayor, but that's a picture when he was older, and that's like all I've got. We've got nothing on Mayor Pelton outside the fact that he was mayor. Mayor Baker might have been, or Mayor Snyder might have been a baker. I'm sorry, I biffed that one a little bit. Mayor Snyder might have been a baker. Mayor Alfred Cowell was a part of an unsuccessful, I believe the city's first recall attempt, but it was unsuccessful toward the end of his time in office. The mayor and 2 councilors were accused of being, quote, inefficient and extravagant in the management of city business. According to some, the mayor and his friends were benefiting too much from their time in office. The targets of the recall campaign survived, the voters did not recall them, and they finished their terms in office. Over an 18-year period, Mayor Julius J. Miller, pictured here, served 16 years as a councilor and then a mayor. John M. Mason, we don't have a photo of, but he was a railroad man who came to prominence through his leadership of the local Townsend Club during the Great Depression. The Townsend Clubs were a national movement that advocated for old age pensions. He had been elected by a large majority in November 1934, but due to a heart ailment, was forced to resign shortly after taking office, and unfortunately he passed away in January of 1936. Now moving to the early middle 20th century, a time of fiscal chaos, social upheaval, another world war, and an economic boom. Willard Sanders had served on council before becoming mayor. He would preside over the construction of the current city hall. And sadly, Mayor Sanders also died shortly after leaving office. Earl Burdick was the first of several mayors who would serve as council members, then mayor, and then city manager. Mayor Burdick presided over the opening of City Hall in 1938. Mayor Fred Roberts was a member of a very prominent family in early Milwaukee history. His father was the first council president in 1903, and his sister Nell, pictured there, was the city's long-serving recorder. Fred and Nell were elected together in 1940 and largely ran the city throughout the war years. Anyone who knows me knows I'm very fond of talking about Nell Martin, and if anybody wants to talk more about that amazing person, Miss Milwaukee, I'm happy to do so. But I've been limited here. Mayor Roberts was a master mechanic, one of several mechanics to serve as mayor. He was a mechanic by training, and he served on council for 11 years, first as mayor and then later in the early 50s as a council member. Fred Spur, with an amazing top hat, was another councilor turned mayor then city manager. Mayor Spur had become locally famous in the 1910s as one of the area's first school bus drivers. As mayor, Spur presided over the 1947 celebrations marking the community's 100th anniversary since being settled by the pioneers in the 1840s. Mayor Leonard Mullen was a second-generation Milwaukeean when he was born here in the 1890s. He owned several auto garages in Washington before buying the Milwaukee Trolley Car Barn in 1937. He would operate the famous car barn, which sat across from current City Hall on the lot that is now used for farmers market. He owned that building and used it, ran it as a service station until his retirement in 1957. And there's a photo of his rendition of what he'd done with the car barn there. Mullen's public service began in 1948 when he was appointed to the Planning Commission. In 1950, he was appointed and then elected to fill a vacant council seat. He would go on to be the last of the councilor, then mayor, then city managers. As mayor and city manager, Mullen worked tirelessly to promote Milwaukee, and his tenure saw the rapid growth of the mid-20th century post-war years. And to highlight that, here Mayor Mullen is in a few factories around town. Bottom right, he is there with Governor Douglas McKay and Mrs. McKay there. He retired from public life in 1963 and remained a community presence until his passing in 1983. Upon his death, the Mullen family donated the Milwaukee Mayor's plaque, which, for those here tonight, you can take a look at that plaque outside in the hallway. Now on to the rest of the middle 20th century, and like the rest of the country, the 60s proved to be a very tumultuous period in Milwaukee, and here are some quick notes on the mayors of those era. Mayor Earl Clay signed the council resolution that adopted the dogwood as the logo and the Dogwood City of the West nickname. Mayor Joe Bernard was another mechanic who became an elected official, and so far he is the only father whose son would also be mayor. Mayor George P. Haley, his time in office was short at just 9 months in 1965. Mayor Haley was an attorney who had defeated former Mayor Mullen after a recount and legal battle declared him the winner by just 6 votes. The seminal issue facing Mayor Haley was the adoption of the first city budget exceeding $1 million. The community grappled with this and the adoption of this fiscal milestone for years, and ultimately that issue led to Mayor Haley resigning when his proposals had failed to garner council support and voter approval several times. Falling in line with the factions opposed to Mayor Haley's approach, Mayor Robert Richmond was appointed when Mayor Haley resigned. He proved to be an amiable leader who guided the city through the adoption of that first $1 million budget and the super controversial arrival of Oregon Highway 224, the Milwaukee Expressway, which many believe would divide the city, and they may have been right. Mayor Richmond was locally known as the owner of the Dairy Queen that once sat on Main Street in downtown. Continuing the tumult of the 1960s, Mayor Frank Clore came into office with a lot of youthful energy. He had served on council prior to his election as mayor, and during the mayoral campaign, he had billed himself as, quote, the man from Milwaukee. And he also highlighted his many ties to Democratic Party leadership. However, for a number of reasons, including some of the issues I already noted in the 60s, Mayor Clore's term was short-lived, as he resigned just shy of a year in office in December of '69 amid threats of a recall, which led to Don Graff, the only person in Milwaukee history to serve 2 non-consecutive terms as mayor. He served as between '69 and '74, and again in 1998. In both cases, he was appointed to the position when the office had been vacated. In '69, Graff replaced Frank Clore and went on to be elected and then reelected over the following 5 years. Graff had a long career with the Pacific Northwest Bell Telephone Company, and in retirement, between stints as mayor, Don Graff was an active volunteer with Loaves and Fishes, the Clackamas County Agency for Aging, Metro's Light Rail Study Project, and the Kiwanis Club. Moving on to one of the more colorful mayoral histories we have, and those who remember Bill Hupp could get a chuckle out of that. Bill Hupp was a photographer, community booster, reserve officer, and one of the, quote, cleverest motorcycle clowns. There was no shortage of opinions about him. Some called him a maverick, a troublemaker, a fighting tiger, a person who had no qualms about being a minority of one. As a member of the Portland Police motorcycle stunt and drill team, he earned the nickname of Wobbly Weary Willie as a motorcycle clown. He became a photographer and purchased a studio that he moved to Milwaukee in 1958, and he quickly became famous locally for his photos and his opinions. He joined many social clubs and wrote articles titled Rebel Ramblings, Milwaukee Montage, and Hupp's Its and Bits. Even before he was elected to council, Hupp was a change maker. In 1961, he started playing Christmas music from the roof of his car, until the municipal code was amended to ban such noisy activity. He shamed the railroad into improving the downtown rail crossings. He convinced council to install a public address system in Chambers, which I think is still the one that we use there. And he personally recorded many council meetings. And he worked with the businesses to install trash cans on Main Street, which I think have all been replaced at this point, but are the genesis to the ones that are out there today. His official city service began in '64 when he was appointed to the Budget Committee. He would go on to win election to council in '68 and would serve 2 terms as mayor beginning in '74, retiring in '79. For decades after leaving office, Bill Hupp remained a character in our community. In the '80s, he hosted a cable access program with 2 other former mayors, and they regularly took aim at those at City Hall. And as late as 2003, Hupp could be seen riding his little rascal scooter all over Milwaukee. Alan Manuel, who had been elected to council in '76, was appointed to serve as mayor after Hupp resigned, and at first he looked like a shoo-in to win election to the position in '80. However, unfortunately for him, he drew a very strong challenger in Joy Burgess and would serve just a little less than 2 years as mayor. Joy Bell Burgess was also a fairly colorful character in Milwaukee mayoral history. She started her public service career in the '60s through her neighborhood association, and she was soon appointed to the Parks and Beautification Committee, where she helped create Spring Park, North Clackamas Park, and the Milwaukee Community Center. She was first elected to council in 1972 and was reelected in '76. Joy Burgess was the first woman elected mayor of Milwaukee when she defeated Alan Manuel in 1980. She would be reelected mayor in '82, but resigned in '84 due to an ongoing fight with cancer. She was a fiscal conservative, believing she had been elected to, quote, hold the line as much as possible on any increase which would affect the average person's budget. She opposed the effort to consolidate urban North Clackamas County into a single city, believing it would lead to too much government. But at the same time, Mayor Burgess was an ardent supporter of a Portland-Milwaukee light rail line and believed strongly in enhancing TriMet's regional transportation services. Joy Burgess was involved in many social groups, including the League of Women Voters, the Chamber of Commerce, and the Milwaukie Historical Society, and she was also a poet with over 400 published works. The end of the 20th century saw a lot of growth in Milwaukee, and the city's mayors were kept very busy dealing with change. Following Mayor Burgess's resignation, Councilor Ronald Kinsella was appointed mayor and would be elected to the position that same year. It was during Kinsella's time as mayor that the library was expanded. The original building, if you recall, had a Clark wing of the building, and that happened in the mid-'80s. And the first Dogwood Day was proclaimed by Mayor Kinsella. Roger Hall was elected to council in '81 and was elected mayor in '86. Mayor Hall would be the last mayor to serve in those 2-year terms, as voters approved a charter change that lengthened the mayoral terms to 4 years, and that started in with the election of November of 1990. Roger Hall was an insurance representative who got involved in local government when he served on a panel studying the annexation of unincorporated areas around Milwaukee. Sounds a little familiar. As mayor, Hall supported growing Milwaukee and developing the waterfront, and he took pride in bringing civility to council meetings following years of rocky council relations. Craig Lomnicki had a background in natural resource management and urban planning. He was elected to council in 1984 and made an unsuccessful run for mayor in '86. He was, though, elected in 1990, and he would be a mayor of several firsts. In 1990, he became the first mayor elected to the 4-year terms. He was the first to travel internationally on behalf of the city when he led a delegation to Milwaukee's then sister city, Iwaki, Japan, in 1994. and he is the first and so far only mayor to be recalled. In 1998, voters recalled 2 council members and the mayor because they had supported light rail. Following the recall election, the remaining 2 members of council appointed former Mayor Don Graff to serve as mayor until a special election could be held to fill the seat. And at that special election in 1998, Milwaukeeans elected Carolyn Tomei to serve as mayor. 3 years later, Tomei would resign to take a seat in the State House of Representatives. As mayor, Tomei oversaw many projects and programs, and I will defer to her to discuss those further. Following Tomei's resignation in 2001, Jim Bernard was appointed mayor. He would go on to be elected and re-elected to the position. In 2009, Bernard resigned to take a seat on the Board of County Commissioners. Jim Bernard is so far the only son of a former mayor to serve as mayor, Jim's father Joe having filled the position in the 60s. In his 9 years at City Hall, Mayor Bernard oversaw many projects and many decisions were made that laid the groundwork for the city's work in the decade after he left office, namely the acquisition of land for Riverfront, now Milwaukie Bay Park, the return of light rail, and the expansion of the Letting Library. Rounding out our illustrious list of mayors, we come to those who have served more recently. Jeremy Ferguson was appointed mayor when Bernard resigned. Ferguson was elected and then re-elected over a 5-year period. Mayor Ferguson worked for TriMet and Portland Streetcar for much of the time that he was in city office. In 2014, Ferguson was the second mayor to travel abroad on city business, going to China on an economic relations trip. In January 2015, just weeks after being re-elected and sworn in, Mayor Ferguson resigned to take a job in Seattle. Wilda Parks is the only person so far to be sworn into office 3 times in a single year. In 2015, she was appointed mayor to replace Jeremy Ferguson, and when Mark Gamba vacated a council seat following his election to mayor, Wilda was appointed to fill that council seat. And finally, that November of that year, Wilda was elected to hold that seat for the remainder of the term. Wilda had a career as a Chamber of Commerce executive in Montana and California, and finally in Milwaukee. And although Wilda's tenure as mayor was short, she went on to serve for over half a decade on the city council. Since retiring from council, she has continued to serve on many regional and county committees. A native of Colorado, Mark Gamba is a professional photographer who spent time in New York City before arriving in Milwaukee around the year 2000. Gamba was a founding member of the city's Arts Committee. He served on the Planning Commission and was elected to council in 2012 before winning the special mayoral election in 2015. Gamba's time as mayor saw a new community vision crafted, the adoption of a climate action plan, and infrastructure projects initiated, among many other things that I will defer to him to expand on in a few minutes. In 2022, Mayor Gamba became the second Milwaukee mayor, 3rd council member to be elected to the state legislature. And that brings us to today, and Mayor Lisa Beatty, who was sworn into office in January. Mayor Beatty was born in Oklahoma, attended college on the East Coast, and lived in Washington, D.C. before moving to Milwaukee. A lawyer by training, she worked for the federal government until she retired last year. Prior to becoming mayor, Beatty had been appointed to the Citizens Utility Advisory Board, the Planning Commission, and had served 2 full terms as a council member. This concludes a brief overview of the history of Milwaukee's mayors. As you have heard, the service rendered by these 31 individuals has done much to shape our city. Each mayor brought their own vision to the job and their own understanding of what it means to live in the Dogwood City of the West. Thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, in particular about Nell Martin, I'd be happy to answer them.
See, I told you he was the best city employee, didn't I? A Juneteenth celebration will be held on Saturday, June 17th from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. at Water Tower Park. This community-led gathering is an opportunity to celebrate, reflect, and amplify Black voices in the city. Juneteenth, also known as Emancipation Day, Jubilee Day, and Freedom Day, is the oldest nationally celebrated holiday, honoring the freedom of enslaved people in the United States. All Milwaukee community members are invited and welcome to attend the event, and Milwaukee Museum will have a display there as well. Parking in the area is limited, so please carpool or use other transportation options if possible. Join us for Pride Day on June 24th. Save the date for a community-led festive gathering in Scott Park to celebrate Pride Month with food, activities, booths, and more beginning at 10 a.m. and lasting till noon. Check the city calendar for more details. So all of you have seen some advertising that's been floating around, and you've seen pictures of Jim Bernard that was on there. And by the way, without Mayor Gamba, Representative Gamba. And that's because, thanks to the Oregon Republican senators, Mark didn't have anything to do at Salem today. So as our state representative, he could boogie on up, which is great. We weren't really quite sure at the time. Now, Jim did show up. He just happened to be here 24 hours ago. So he missed the date. So, and he, bless his soul, he was on vacation at the coast and drove all the way up here for this. So that's why he wasn't willing to come on back. So we all get that. So I want to introduce our special guests tonight. Carolyn Tomei, who was mayor from 1998 to 2001, and Mark Gamba, who was from 2015 to 2022. And first, if you guys could both introduce yourselves and give us a little bit of background by answering the question, why did you become mayor? Carolyn, would you like to go first?
Well, thank you. Why did I become mayor? Because I was elected. It was a strange choice because the previous mayor, a great guy, Craig Lomnicki, had been recalled because of light rail. That situation was just a long, long story. If you don't know, we can tell you another time. So there, actually, Rob Kappa was here a few minutes ago. He and I were on council, and then we ran against each other, and I was elected to be mayor. So it was not a particularly joyous time because a really good person had been recalled for something that he really wasn't responsible for, that the community didn't like. So does that answer your question? Why did I?
That's perfect.
Okay.
Representative
Do you
Gamba.
want a more introduction about her at all?
Sure.
What?
Introduce yourself more, I think. Tell us more about all the things you did.
Oh, how much time do you have? I've lived in Milwaukee for several decades, and I've been very much an activist. And we live in the Island Station neighborhood, right along the river. And some years ago, the sewage treatment plant, thank you for that invitation, the sewage treatment plant was built in our neighborhood. And it was called Old Stinky. Anybody, were you living in this area? Yeah, you know what that was like. You smelled that, certainly in our neighborhood, where we were right next door to that. And also in the downtown area, the businesses down there and the neighborhood association in that neighborhood. Everybody hated that darn thing. So 3 women, and at that point, we learned that they were intending to come into my neighborhood where I'm still living. And that didn't appeal to me a whole lot. So 3 of us women, Mary Jo Morris and, oh golly, the third one I can't remember. I'll come to it. But we decided we were going to stop that damn thing, and we did. Not by ourselves, of course, but we started the ball rolling. And we got a lot of people involved in the city and in the county. And actually, somebody came up with the option. We could put it in Johnson Creek. Oh, I don't think so. So some bad ideas, but there were some really good ideas. And then we looked at other options, what could be happening in that piece of property in Milwaukie. And there were some really good ideas and interesting ideas. But then we in that neighborhood and other people around downtown Milwaukie, we discussed, is that what we want? Actually, we need a sewage treatment plant. We did in Clackamas County. So how could we have the sewage treatment plant to be a good neighbor? And that's what we developed, a good neighbor committee. And that good neighbor committee is still working. And there is no stench. If you drive by it on McLaughlin, if you walk by it now along the riverfront, there is no stench. So thanks to 3 of us women in the Island Station neighborhood, starting to get that ball rolling. And that was a very exciting time. And that's my cane that fell. So there have been other things I've been really involved in. That was one of the biggest ones. And the other one was the riverfront. Has anybody lived here more than, say, 40 or 50 years? Do you remember what the riverfront was like? Oh, really? Somebody said yeah? Okay. Oh, Vic's Tavern, absolutely. Vic's Tavern. That's right, apartments. Right. Yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah. And there was a car dealership on McLaughlin too. And so all of that, people would drive by Milwaukie. There was a sewage treatment plant. And there was all this other stuff. And they didn't know that there was a river over there. So that seemed like really a shame. So several of us started working together there to see what we could do with the downtown, or the riverfront downtown. So we were able to move the car dealership. We tore down those old buildings. I think I might have been mayor at that time, and I think I took a sledgehammer, hit the first, whatever you call it, on that building. So that was a great time, get rid of the sewage treatment plant and get rid of those buildings. And now, the sewage treatment plant is a good neighbor. All of us say that, those of us who live along that area. They're good neighbors. They've made a beautiful path through their property, so now you can go from Johnson Creek down all through the city with the wonderful park. That's because we got rid of those old ugly buildings and the car dealership. And now you can go all the way to Spring Park and walk then over to Elk Rock Island, which is another story that you might want me to wait for another time, but that is a glorious place. I'll tell you one more thing about Elk Rock Island. Have you ever been to the Bishop's Close on the other side of the river? So if you ever go to the building where the people lived there, there was a sign that talked about Milwaukie, and the designer decided to make the house far away from the riverfront because they didn't want to look at dilapidated Milwaukie. So we are no longer dilapidated, folks. We are beautiful Milwaukie with the riverfront, with the beautiful buildings, yeah. And the sewage treatment plant is a really good neighbor. And they keep that committee going, Good Neighbors, and they invite us in the neighborhood to be a part of that. What are we doing that's good and what's not good? And they've been great, great neighbors. So that's my speech. Thank you.
Representative Gamba?
Good evening, everybody. What got me to run for mayor? I'd been a photographer, as was said, and one of my clients was National Geographic, so I spent quite a bit of time seeing other parts of the world, and years before climate change was predicted to start affecting things, I was seeing the very effects that were predicted 20 years before. Glaciers up in Alaska that had melted back miles and miles, and coral reefs off of Australia that were starting to bleach. And I had a pretty good sense of what climate change was going to lead to for all of us. And frankly, I wasn't seeing anybody really at any level of government, sadly, doing the level of work that we needed to be doing to address that. And since I wasn't a millionaire, I couldn't run for president, so I ran for the Milwaukie City Council. Carolyn and Carlotta Collette were two of my mentors early on. Served on the Planning Commission first and then the council, and recognized while I was serving on council that even though the mayor in a city that has the form of government we have is just one more vote on the city council, there is an opportunity with the bully pulpit and sort of the esteem, I guess, that a lot of people hold the mayor in beyond what they hold a city councilor in. It's not real, but then a lot of things in politics aren't real. But it's useful. And so I ran for mayor after Jeremy decided to move to Seattle. And we did a lot of the things that I intended to do. We started out with a visioning process that really drew the community together and made it clear that there were a lot of changes that people wanted to see to make it more livable, more equitable, more sustainable city. And then we passed the Climate Action Plan, and we've done a ton of work on bike and pedestrian infrastructure throughout the city. Passed really good tree code, we've passed really good housing code, we've done more work to cause housing to be affordable in this city than most other cities have done. So we got a lot of what I hoped to do accomplished. And so it was a really good time to be in the city, because I think, you know, we talk about Lomnicki, who was a great guy, he really was, and he was just kind of ahead of his time. And you know, we lost a good mayor there. But I happened to come at a time when the things that I was trying to do were, people were more willing to look at and consider. And the process we went through and the visioning really proved that out. So, sufficient?
So I'm going to wander around like the Phil. Okay, I'm sorry. Oprah. I guess Oprah's probably a better. I'm from Chicago, so I always say the Phil Donahue Show. So I'm going to wander around. Anytime that anybody has a question, just raise up your hand. All right, so I'm going to be wandering around with the mic. They told me last time I walked off camera like 9,000 times. So if you see me just kind of standing in the background, you have any questions at any point in time, just raise your hand. That goes along for our Zoom audience there as well. So let's start off with the first topic, which is probably the most controversial one that we've had in the city of Milwaukie, and that's light rail. So a little bit of background for those of you that have been around. What was imagined as the Orange Line was actually turned down by voters in 1996, but the program just kind of kept pushing itself through. It recalled the mayor. I mean, it was controversy, and it was probably controversy all the way up until that train rolled on down the line to the first time. So we have two unique perspectives here, and so you guys were both advocates for the light rail coming to Milwaukie, and so the question is, why do you think it was important to bring the line here, and has it produced what you thought it would bring to the city?
One of the reasons people had such opposition to this line was that it went up Washington Street. It affected St. John's School and Church and the high school. It was just a very poor choice. And I think that's really unfortunate because, as you point out, two really good people were recalled because of that. And that was a shame. But I think it has been a good thing for Milwaukie. I grew up in Southern California. And so I remember the cars and the pollution, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this was a good solution, I think, for us in Milwaukie. So I think it's been a good option for us, and I'm glad that it happened.
I think to add to that, the original design was basically an extension of the Green Line. So that meant if you were commuting from Milwaukie to downtown Portland, which is kind of the way Portland thinks about, the Portland metro area thinks about transportation, is that all jobs are in downtown Portland. We know that's not true, but that's how the transportation designers have thought about it for years. Your commute would have been something like 45 minutes or an hour if you got on the train in Milwaukie and you were going to downtown Portland. Well, that didn't make sense. Yeah. So it's not surprising to me, and I see some wisdom in the fact that Milwaukie rejected that concept. The current concept, obviously, that's a pretty quick commute. It's 18 minutes, depending on where you're going in downtown Portland. The question of whether or not it's resulted in what we hoped for, I think there's two parts to that. One is what it did for the city. And I think when I moved here, which was 20 some odd years ago, 3 years ago, Milwaukie was essentially a bedroom community to Portland. Downtown was basically dead. I think there was 2 restaurants in the entire downtown. A lot of empty storefronts. There hadn't been a significant amount of development in the city. This was just starting to, or being envisioned, this apartment complex right here. But really, it was a pretty sleepy place, and there was a lot of folks that wanted it that way. They were like, that's exactly what we want. But they also, in the same conversation, they'd say, but I want a bakery, or I want a better grocery store, or I want a bookstore. And I'm like, yeah, you gotta have enough people to make that business thrive. So I think what it did for the city is that it highlighted what a charming city we have, and that you could live in this charming small town and commute to your job in Portland pretty readily. So it sort of created that energy and that movement, and I think we've capitalized on that pretty well with all of the other things that we did to tag on to that, the various transportation systems, the downtown, the way we worked on the zoning downtown, things like that, that have really helped continue that momentum. And I have to tell you, serving in the legislature, that we are the envy of many parts, particularly of the metro region, because we have done a lot of things right that other cities have struggled with. So I do believe that the light rail line was absolutely a boon to Milwaukie. Now, the second question is, was that a great transportation system? And that, I would imagine, still remains to be seen. As gas prices go up, which they will eventually have to do, it will become more popular. The pandemic put a real dent in all mass transit, and we have still not recovered from that. So it still remains to be seen. But I do think that mass transit has to be one of the solutions if we hope to reduce the congestion in this city, which I think many of us would like to see. Mass transit is one of the better answers. Los Angeles is just now figuring that out, and they're starting to build light rail around Los Angeles.
Is that okay to just ask a quick question about, I hear people talk, we lived in Hillsborough and it happened out there, but this concept a lot of people have, it'll bring people from the city and crime, like that whole thing. How do you even address that or acknowledge it?
The crime train. Yeah, that was a classic. And here's an interesting thing. If you dig into all of the cities around this country that have proposed light rail projects, you'll see the exact same phrasing pop up. So you wonder, coincidentally, how does that happen? Can't imagine how that might happen. And I would say it's the fossil fuel industry that's promoting that concept. I loved joking about that at the time when people would bring that up, and it was still in the process. And I'd say, yeah, I can see all those folks, going out and stealing your big flat screen TV and then getting on the light rail to bring it back to their home. That's going to work out well for them. It was pure propaganda, and we had zero bump in crime due to light rail. So.
I would go to the city council meetings, and I worked on some TriMet committees for light rail for Milwaukie. So I got to see both sides. And I remember hearing this old guy. It was a lot of the older people didn't want light rail. It's going to bring them pedophiles to Milwaukie. All those criminals are going to be coming in on that train. And I just couldn't stand it anymore. And I stood up and started yelling at this guy. And I said, you have 3 cars. I know where you live. And you got a truck in the back. And you don't drive any of them. Because he's too old, And I go, oh my God, And I said, a lot of these people that are saying they don't want it, the first day, they did free rides for everybody. They were on it, and they loved it, But afterwards, Jim Bernard came up to me. He says, "You said everything we all want to say to that guy, But we just couldn't, because of who we are, But yeah, I was a big proponent of it. I wasn't around when they were doing mapping it out, but I was around to convince them in all the meetings we had in here and, you know, at the old library, so, yeah.
Citizens being involved, just as you were, is so important. That what makes jobs of the city council members and the mayors and the legislators so much better, because we need input from citizens. What do you think that's important? What would you like to see here? And we get a lot of that kind of thing, the naysayers who are complaining about things. Yeah, so good for you.
Maybe you should go talk to the Republican senators.
We can't find them.
So speaking of naysayers, Carolyn, you've been around long enough to remember downtown as what the old people call Mayberry, right? So it was street lined. You could walk and get your prescription, your groceries, your clothes, do your banking, do everything, all in the downtown area. We all know that the recession of the early 80s, coupled with loosening of crediting and the idealistic new vision of America, shop till you drop, opened up large-scale malls, kind of made the downturn or reduced the ability for people to be able to hold retail shops open downtown. You all have worked, right, to advance downtown development. You remember it as Mayberry. I still sit by the campfire with you and hear the old stories. Mark, you helped brokered what would be Axletree and what may become of Coho Point. And so my question is that with all of your experience, what can we do to either encourage downtown growth, or is it stable enough to grow on its own?
I think that's a great question. I don't have the background to know that, but I think there are people that can tell us how we could develop Milwaukie, downtown Milwaukie, similar to what it was in its heyday. Yeah, there were 2 grocery stores, there were 2 drugstores, the Gay Blade for men, the women's dress shop. That's gone, and it probably will not be replaced. But what can we do to increase whatever we can with the use of downtown and people going there? And I love the First Fridays. Yeah, that's a great way to get people downtown.
Yeah. So I think, you know, there's a lot there, and something that I learned when I was still on the Planning Commission, we had some experts from out of town to sort of look into that very question. And this one woman, I remember her sort of explaining to me, which seemed like a no duh after she got done explaining it, but it took explaining to me. I was like, why can't we get a grocery store to function in this downtown? She goes, well, look at the population pattern. If you plunk a grocery store in the middle of this downtown, you've got half of a circle to work with, right? So the houses, whatever the circle is, or it's a 4-mile circle, 5-mile circle, folks that will come to that grocery store, you've only got half the circle because we got a river right there. So there's half the circle gone. She said the only way you're going to get a grocery store back in this downtown or anywhere near it is if the downtown goes up, right? If we get more population density. And I was like, okay, so that was a big light bulb for me. So all of the process, all of the zoning and planning processes we've done since then, all the comp plan work, all of that stuff, we've aimed at allowing that to happen in downtown, because and you can see it's working, right? It took me 4 years to get somebody back in this, and it's still not open, right, in that grocery store. But we were struggling, and it was for the same reason, somewhat. It was also because that grocery store space was being held. Safeway was paying rent on that space, even though it was empty, to keep another grocery store from coming in. So, but now because of the apartment complex behind there and the apartments that are coming in down here, New Seasons can look at that and they go, okay, there's enough people to support. So the more that we see that happen as these various buildings open up and the folks move in, we're going to see more venues, restaurants, bars, bookstores, all of the things that you don't buy online. I mean, that's the world we're in right now. The retail, normal retail is dying slowly because online is picking up so much of that. But what's not dying is the active places that people want to go do something. So that's restaurants, that's bars, that's coffee shops, that's tea shops. Those kinds of places will thrive, which is why when we brokered the deal on the Axle Tree, we were like, all of the ground floor spaces have to be vented as restaurants. That's what didn't happen over here. It's why Beer Store has a very limited menu, because they can't put a vent in, so they can't. It gets very technical and very weird, right? But if you can't put a vent in, you can't put a grease fryer in, all of these things. So, yeah. And it's really expensive to do it after the fact. So we pushed for that, and I would hold that, going forward, we need to stick to that, when we're doing these mixed-use buildings, which is ground floor retail and then apartments above or condos, either way, that we continue to push for that kind of infrastructure to be put in the building. It's a little more expensive, but it will allow those spaces to thrive, assuming the landlord is willing to lower the rent enough to actually get somebody in, which is not what's happening at Axle Tree, but another story. Go ahead, sorry.
So why don't they lower? So are they getting a tax break somewhere that says, why would I want to lower it? I'm making more money this way. I mean, that's my perception, but I don't know.
So my guess, and you have to meet Tom Brannicky to, anyway, my guess is that he sees it coming. He sees that the day that Milwaukee rents will be pretty similar to Portland rents for commercial space. And he doesn't want to get a long-term tenant in there that then's going to get popular, and then when he doubles the rent or triples the rent or whatever, he can't get them out. That's my guess. A little bit, but we get a few more of these open up, and it'll pop. It'll happen.
So what about the other black windows that run, I would call the strip of black windows? Okay. I won't say who, but yes.
Well, we've been having conversations with them as well for years. We encouraged Dark Horse to consolidate into one building. We encouraged them to do a ground floor that would be the museum of comic history or something like that, because Mike has one of the best collections of comic art in the world. I mean, he's got original pieces from every comic you can think of. He's got original pieces from that. It's a really impressive collection. And they could open a museum there. I've met tourists that came to downtown Milwaukee wandering around like, where's Dark Horse? Like, that's it. And they're like, how can we go in? You can't go in. There is no public-facing piece to that. So it's a financial decision for folks like that, right? And it's expensive. A building like that would cost, $40–50 million, and they would probably never make it back on what they would charge for people to come into the museum. So what it's going to take is the economics of the spaces in Milwaukee becoming so valuable that it's more valuable to do that than to continue to rent out. Well, I mean, he owns all that stuff at this point. So it's all going to be economics before we get that. But we don't have any, other than Axle Tree, we really don't have any empty storefronts anymore, which when I got here, there were a lot.
And so that's where the heart of this question is. So is there something that the government can do to make the changes? Or is it really just about economic development and land pricing?
We've done all the things, I think. I mean, maybe there's some community development folks out there that have some ideas that would be tweaks to what we've done, but we've done all the things. We've zoned it properly. We've passed laws about those being active spaces. We've encouraged and made it easy to do, easier than Portland by a long shot, to do these apartment buildings. So that dynamic of, as the population grows, those storefronts will become more valuable, and that should cause it to kick. That's really, and short of the city buying out properties and renting them out, which is not something really cities do. That's the best we can do at this point, I think.
And Carolyn, what would you like to see downtown? What kind of things would you like to see?
I'd like that to be Mayberry. I like that a whole lot. That was wonderful. And I'm so glad that somebody is smart and knowledgeable and is forward-thinking, as Mark has been on the city council and as mayor. We certainly need this kind of energy and intelligence. It's a tough issue. So I think your ideas are great, and boy, let's applaud them. I don't think it's ever going to go back to being Mayberry, but boy, if you go down on the first Fridays, and you'll see a lot of people downtown. A lot of people want it to be Mayberry again. So let's see what we can do about that.
Yeah, it's happening. First Fridays, the farmers market.
Yeah.
This place is bustling, right?
Yeah.
And it's continuing to have those events is important because it helps remind people that don't live right here in this part of Milwaukee that there is a downtown to Milwaukee. When I first moved here, everyone went away to get groceries. They went someplace else to go out to dinner, to go get a drink, to go do whatever. Now a lot of people do it right here, and a lot of folks from outside. We have people from Lake Oswego that come to our farmers market.
So good.
Yeah.
So life is not full of roses. Even Outcast said, sometimes roses smell like poo-poo. So you guys, I remember the different voices and visions on council. Mayor Tomei, you took over a position from a recall mayor, which must have been difficult. And Mayor Gamba, you struggle with getting people on board with your vision. What was one of the most difficult times with your councilors, and how did you find one of those solutions?
That's a good question. I'm going to let you answer first.
I mean, you're right from the standpoint of when the light rail opened, that was literally the first public speech I gave, and it was in Portland at the big grand opening ceremony with all these luminaries, and I said something about using the catalyst of the light rail line to cause Milwaukee to become the most livable, most equitable, and most sustainable city in the state. And when I tried to get my council on board with that, there was a fair amount of pushback. But to Lisa's credit, she said, no, we need to do a public process. We can't just go with your idea of what Milwaukee should become. And I was like, that makes sense. And hindsight being 2020, that was absolutely what caused it to work. I mean, that is the opening line in our vision, is more or less what I said in that speech. But it's because a huge portion of the population decided those were the things they wanted too, that's what has made it happen. Because otherwise, every decision that followed that got us to where we are today would have been a fight. Every single one would have been a fight. and it has not been that way. I would say that the council for the last 10 years or so has been all moving generally in the same direction, and we've accomplished a lot with that. It wasn't a whole bunch of yes people. We had a lot of really good, deep conversations, and there were disagreements, and there were 3-2 votes, but because we all had this vision we were working from, we continued to move in the same direction, and that's powerful. A lot of cities, particularly cities this size, don't do that, and they ping pong back and forth between concepts, and they never get anywhere. And they can, Gladstone is a classic example. I mean, they have hundreds of millions of dollars worth of infrastructure that is needs to be replaced. Sewage lines, water lines that they don't have the funding to do because they had a mayor for 36 years whose whole thing was, we're not going to raise taxes. Well, stuff costs more money than it cost 36 years ago. And so they're in trouble. They have a lot, you know, and you've seen West Lynn in their fights and all the various things. So that visioning was one of the most powerful things. It was probably the most powerful thing we could have done as a city. I'm actually in conversations down in Salem right now trying to get the state to do a similar process. Particularly right now we're talking about water, which seems like a pretty boring, mundane topic, but I tell you what, in 50 years it's not going to be a boring, mundane topic. It's going to be the thing people care about more than anything else. And so I'm working on trying to do that same process statewide in that realm because it's so powerful. And I learned that lesson here.
Aren't we lucky to have had Mark as a mayor, so effective, and now in the legislature, forward-thinking, some great ideas, and he does his homework, he does the studies, he follows all that, so we're very, very lucky to have you. Thank you, Mark.
So just one real quick plug. For those of you who don't know, if you go to the Milwaukie Heritage YouTube channel, our last Letting Library Lecture Series was the counselors, which were 3 counselors during what we call the Gamba reign here in this town. And listen to that conversation that they had. They may not have all have agreed, but they all said one thing, is that Mark was a visionary. And that nobody else that people have ever met had there are a lot of doers, there are a lot of tinkers, there's a lot of thinkers. Nobody's ever really met a visionary quite like Mark did, saw the end of the road at the very beginning of the statement. So it should be people talk still glowing of you. And now, Carolyn, come on, you've been in the state representative, you've been mayor, you've been on the planning commission. There's got to be a time that you've disagreed with somebody, and besides throwing them off into the river, how else did you resolve the situation?
I did, several.
Or jump out of a plane to get away from them.
Right. Mark's got a tough job. It was easier when you've got a limited number of people in the city council and you've got certain things to work with. And you've got a staff, like Scott, there he is over there, wonderful guy. So the city work is so much more difficult. You've got a whole lot of people, many people who are diametrically opposed to anything that it is that you want. It's really hard, lots of negotiation, a lot of work. And when you go down there, you've got 8 o'clock in the morning meetings, and you probably have a meeting that goes on in the evening too. So either you have to find a place to stay in Salem, or you're driving all day long. Or it seems like all day long. So he's got a tough job, but luckily he's in a good place. He's a visionary, he's smart, he does his homework, and we're very lucky to have him in Salem. And I appreciate you taking that on.
I had a good mentor.
So that actually brings us up to the next topic. You guys have both advanced your careers from being mayors in Milwaukee. Both of you are House District 41 state legislators, representatives, which covers us and a little bit of Sutwood, right? If I remember
Right now, because of the new redistricting, it goes from more or less the Oak Grove post office up to the Ross Island Bridge, and then kind of a weird shape, but yeah, so Woodstock, Sellwood, Eastmoreland, Westmoreland, Milwaukee, and Oak Grove.
Which is kind of a wide, different region of constituents.
Oh, yes.
Right? Totally different ideas, totally different things. So how do you use your mayoral remembrances or how you worked your mayoral position here in Milwaukee to carry that next step forward when you're in the state legislature or dealing with, working with your constituents?
Well, you're the prominent one now.
Well, interestingly, my mayoral experience has caused me to go head-to-head with the governor, which is not something I wanted to do in my freshman term. She has a staff that's advising her that cities are the problem, cities are the reason we don't have enough housing in the state. And so I think one of the most brilliant things the state of Oregon has ever done is our land use system. Senate Bill 100 was absolutely genius. It was visionary. And it's the reason we don't look like Atlanta or Houston. We're not spread for miles and miles and miles and miles. We've protected our farmlands, we've protected our forest lands, we've caused land use decisions to be done at the local level so that development occurs thoughtfully, right? On all kinds of levels. This bill that the governor originally proposed would basically gut the whole land use process at the city level.
Really?
And just allow developers to do whatever they want in the name of more housing. And it didn't matter if it was going to be affordable housing. It didn't matter if it was going to be, $1.2 million McMansions. It didn't matter. We're just gutting the land use system and letting the developers have a free-for-all. So unsurprisingly, I pushed back and got sideways with the governor pretty fast, or at least with her staff. But because of the work I did and the background I had both in land use and as a mayor, the amendment that eventually became what is the bulk of the bill is the amendment that I wrote. And I did that in conjunction with the League of Oregon Cities, with a bunch of environmental groups, a lot of people advising, helping me write that. It still does make it easier for developers to ask for changes that might not be approved of by the neighbors. But it's a lot more limited. But it's an ongoing, that's the reason I almost didn't make it tonight. It's an ongoing thing. There is now a -17. My original amendment was the -5, and then we did an update, and that became the -13 because there were amendments in between. And then we worked with the Speaker's office and created the -14, which is essentially my amendment with a couple of tweaks, one of which I still strongly disagree with. And now there's a -17 that's being written by the Home Builders Association, which is the fancy word for the developers.
It's Home Building Association now.
Did they change it?
Yeah.
They just met with me like a week ago. Anyway,
I think they just did it a couple of days ago, or 3 or 4 days. There's Amendment 18 for you.
So it's an ongoing saga, but my experience doing this, being mayor, was the only thing that allowed me to do that work. And many of my fellow legislators, once they really understood what was going on, were super appreciative. So
We're lucky to have you there.
So Carolyn,
team
come on,
would
you.
disagree.
Now, let's see, did you serve under Governor Roberts all the way up to
No,
Cooling Council?
Kitzhaber
Kitzhaber?
was, yeah.
And I will tell you that Governor Roberts and Ms. Tomei are friends.
Yes,
And I think that you've been friends with almost every governor. Well, I can't say about Kitzhaber, but I know that that you knew Governor Brown fairly well too.
yes.
And so, did you ever have any of those kind of discussions with the governor? Take your rabble-rousing stick and go poke him?
Yes.
What was one of the things that, can you remember a time?
I don't want to talk about it.
Oh, there you go. That's what we love to hear.
I'd like to remain friends.
So I have met Mr. Or Governor Kitzhaber, former Governor Kitzhaber, once. I was in his office. We were doing a thing to a declaration, proclamation, or whatever, So you get to go up to the governor's office, do a song and dance kind of deal, get your picture taken, and so on and so forth. And I was super nervous. And the one thing that you don't know about, he's just a laid-back, kind of cowboyish kind of guy. And so he was a little taken aback that I was taken aback. Just by his personality. And he said, hey, don't be nervous. We all wipe our own beeps. And I was like, I never really thought about it that way, right? So there's a little advice. If you're ever nervous, just remember we all wipe our own beeps. So how was it working? Kitzhaber was probably kind of an interesting individual to work with. And
Oh, he was, yeah. Very intelligent, very well-meaning, sort of on the same path that I guess I was going on. So we never really had a beef, but we had some interesting conversations. And he was a very charming man. Yeah, I appreciated him a lot, and I felt like he appreciated me, so we worked well together. That was nice.
And he has a real lasting legacy in the state. I mean, the Oregon Health Plan is, really the best in the country. And I think it's going to be the thing that allows us to evolve into having universal health care. I will say that we are likely to become the first state that does it.
Good for us.
There are
and good
other
for him.
states working on it. We'll see who gets lands first. But I think that set us on that path.
Good.
any questions from the audience? Yeah. All right. So Led Zeppelin says, good times, bad times, I know I've had my share. So when you were mayor of Milwaukie or at some point in time in your political career, right, what do you think your greatest accomplishment is? Because we have a hard time remembering our accomplishments, but we all remember our failures. So what was one of your greatest accomplishments, and what do you think is the biggest failure or something that you wish would have been done?
Actually, I felt like I was more effective as a citizen activist. You know, I'm talking about the sewage treatment plant, et cetera, and all of the buildings along the riverfront, et cetera. As I see that now, I didn't do that when I was a mayor or a state representative. I did that when I was a citizen, and I organized other citizens to work with me to do that. And I enjoyed being in the legislature. I enjoyed being mayor and being on city council. But there's a lot, it's difficult too, and the part I disliked about working in Salem was the traveling and having to live down there part of the year, et cetera. That was hard, and being away from family. But I felt that as a private citizen, I could make windmills, I could make changes. And you can too, and I think that's one of the things that I'd like to get out on this TV program. Don't wait to be mayor or a city council member. If you see something that needs to be done, get some people together, the smart ones who are willing to work, and you can do miracles. You can change things. And I think that's mostly what I'm proud of that I've done. I enjoyed being on city council. I enjoyed being in the legislature. I have a background in working with children's mental health, et cetera. So I know that I contributed a lot in those areas where I was, I knew what was going on with kids and families, et cetera. I could deal with that. So I think I made some contributions in the council and in the legislature. But I think the things I'm proudest of were the things that I got other citizens to work with me on, and we'll see what we can do. I'm proud of what's happened on the riverfront. I'm proud of the sewage treatment plant. Being a good neighbor, we still have sewage treatment. So, you know, you can do it too. So keep it up. And Mark is phenomenal. I mean, he's a very strong, obviously articulate man who has a lot of background, and if he doesn't have background, he learns it, he studies it, and so when he's prepared when he goes to meetings, et cetera. So we're lucky to have him, especially his real livelihood was through art, and here is this artist doing the work of the people, and we appreciate that.
What was the question?
Greatest accomplishment, and what's the one thing that you wish you would have accomplished? I guess you're so young in your political career, so there's...
Yeah, I'm not done. You know, as mayor, I think the thing I'm proudest of is the vision, the city vision. I think it really, everything else that we did, including really, you know, financing this, making this happen, making the library happen, all sort of spun out of the vision. It caused us to all get in the same, because people have been talking about building a new library for 25 years,
Yeah.
you know, and
you did it.
it took,
And talking about sidewalks for 50 years, for goodness sake.
Exactly. And you know, we're building out $52 million worth of bike and pedestrian infrastructure all over the city. I like to say that when we're done, we will be the most walkable and most bikeable city in the state of Oregon. So I'm proud of all of that stuff. As far as failures, you know, I got into this because of climate, and we got a good climate action plan going. We hired staff, but the way we were funding that and are still funding that was by making it a council goal. So there's some funds for that. My intention was to cause it just to be a department in the city that just was doing its work like any other department, like the water department, you know. And tried twice in the last year on council to set up funding that would have made that a permanent department, and didn't make it happen. So that's my biggest failure. So far.
Yeah.
So
Well-
far. I'm sure I will.
And just so everybody, our sustainability department sits underneath our public works
Yep.
department. And has one employee. I don't know if the tree person is an employee of the sustainability.
Part-time employee of sustainability, yeah.
So, does anybody have any questions currently? All right, so I'm going to hand over to the microphone.
Something I didn't talk about that I'd like to recognize that I was very active in accomplishing was getting Elk Rock Island, which had belonged to the city of Portland. And it's right, of course, we can walk to the island this time of year. And so the city of Portland, I started meeting with the city council members there and the mayor, and working with people and with a lot of the staff who worked on Elk Rock Island, and meeting with them. And I convinced them that Milwaukie would be a better steward of that park than Portland could be. They have to drive, in those days, they would have to drive around or get in a boat, and they weren't likely to do that. So they stay in touch with us to make sure that we're keeping our promises of taking care of the island, and we do. And I just wanted to say one more thing. There was in the early days, before there were roads or walkways to get to the island, it had been a farmland there, so you couldn't walk over to the island. And so the island had to be lit in the early part of the century. There had to be lights there, so the boaters, and that would be moving produce and businesses, et cetera, going down the river. And so there had to be lights there for them to see that there was an island here. And so there was a man who did do that on the island, and he married and had a wife there, and they had a son. And later, of course, decades later, I happened to meet that son. He was a pharmacist here in Milwaukie. And my husband and I put him in our little boat and we rowed over to the island. He'd never been back on the island in all those years. And I'm getting goosebumps just telling that story. Those are the kinds of things, I guess, I love about Milwaukie that I can personally get involved in and make some changes about. So I love Milwaukie. I love it, and I'd like to see some improvements, obviously, but basically, it is a great city with great people who live here.
I won't even tell them that you sit on your back porch and tell them to stop shooting firecrackers and starting fires on the beach, too.
That's right.
Thank you. This is a wonderful conversation. I enjoyed it, and we had more participation tonight than I have seen in the other ones leading up to this. So it was a good conversation. I was remiss earlier when I was giving my introductory comments. This is a session on the mayors, and I really enjoy Scott's presentation as well. I had invited members of the Schindler family, and they're here, to enjoy this conversation as well. So could you just stand up and just introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Joe Schindler. I think he's my great-grandfather. Yeah, who was the first mayor here. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this has been great. Thank you.
Do you still live in town?
I don't. But my parents grew up here. They were born and raised and went through high school.
In that same house, because that house still exists, right?
Yeah. There's, yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah. So I just, like I said, I missed the opportunity earlier, and I didn't want to let it pass. So welcome, and I'm glad you enjoyed this.
All right. So I want to thank you guys both. I know you guys go through a lot. I know that you have been through a lot. You have represented the city of Milwaukie, for decades. And you have been a part and the piece of the inspiration that we all get to enjoy today. You should all be very, very proud. And I will tell you this one thing. In 2014, 2013, whenever that visionary process started, there are people in this room that went to that meeting. And what you don't understand is that this feeling of Mayberry lived on in some of the longtime residents, and even some of the newer residents still had this kind of feeling. And we all basically kind of hashed it out into a room, and we all kind of came to an agreement, and Mark is right. That visioning process brought everybody on board. Just brought everybody on board. And the more that we can do of that, and I will tell you, the Milwaukie 2023 project taught me one lesson about talking to 50 people. And I talk to people all the time at the farmer's market and First Friday and blah, 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 blah. They all come here because it's affordable. I don't care if it was the early white settlers, pioneers, all the way up to today. They all purchase their house or their farm or their apartment because it's affordable. They stay for 3 reasons. 1, the sense of community. 2, they have nice neighbors. And 3, that they have an opportunity to talk to their local government. And so you are both parts and pieces of that. And so thank you so very much. Keep up the good work. Residents of Milwaukie, keep up the good work, right? And anytime that you have a gripe, go down to Elk Rock Island, light a fire, and Carolyn will come on over and, or send her son Dave onto a kayak, and she'll be more than willing to tell you any she'll tell you how to light the fire underneath you to get you to volunteer to do something. So thank you both very, very much for being here. So I just want to end tonight's presentation. So before I let you all go tonight, please remember that October 4th is our next Letting Library lecture series here inside this beautiful building, the Letting Library. Our next lecture is entitled The History of Milwaukie Through an Economic Lens, with a special address by Councilor Nicodemus, 6 p.m. inside the Letting Library, or on Zoom, or watch it taped on Comcast Channel 30 or Milwaukie Heritage YouTube channel when available. And I lost my one last page, and that was going to be it. Once again, my name is Greg Heemer, Communications Director for the Milwaukie Historical Society, the owners and operators of the world's largest museum dedicated to Milwaukie, Oregon history, open Saturdays, 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. Make sure you check out our summer programming every second Saturday of the July, August, and September months for the performance at the museum, like our Facebook page, Milwaukie History Museum, for upcoming events and information. Watch our YouTube videos on Milwaukie Heritage Channel, and visit us at milwaukeemuseum.com. Thank you so much, and have a pleasant evening. Thank you all.